The skies above Thrixar burned with a permanent shade of crimson, as if the planet itself bled from its every pore. Dark clouds rolled lazily across the horizon, casting strange shadows over the jagged landscape, where every corner seemed to conceal some deadly threat. A thick, sulphurous fog hung low to the ground, obscuring the harsh reality that lay beneath it, a world where survival wasn't just a challenge, it was a constant war. Sira had long since stopped hoping for salvation. The notion of being rescued was a distant dream, evaporated into the thick, alien atmosphere like moisture under the relentless heat of the twin suns. Her delicate, violet skin had blistered under Thrixar's merciless sun, and the smooth, almost ethereal appearance of her face was now marred by the scars of daily survival. Her once bright silver eyes had dulled, hollowed by fear and exhaustion. She crouched low behind a rocky outcrop, her breath ragged as she clutched the pitiful scraps of food she had managed to scavenge from the market. Her hands trembled as she wrapped them around the rough, dry bread, bringing it to her parched lips. The bread was stale like sand in her mouth, but she chewed slowly, savoring each bite as though it were a feast. Hunger had become her constant companion, gnawing at her insides, but today she had been lucky, if one could call anything on Thrixar lucky. From her vantage point, she could see the market in the distance, bustling with activity as the local traders barked their wares to passers-by. The market was a chaotic tangle of creatures, tall, thin Thrixians with their insect-like limbs, burly off-world traders draped in dark, rugged cloaks, and even a few distant travelers who dared to set foot on the planet for trade. No one spared her a glance. She was invisible to them, a shadow among monsters. Her heart still pounded from the narrow escape she had made earlier that morning. She had ventured into the market's outskirts, desperate for anything she could find: food, water, even a kind word. She had approached a stall cautiously, her eyes fixed on a vendor who was distracted by another customer. The bread had been sitting there, neglected, a perfect opportunity. But as soon as her fingers brushed the rough crust, the vendor's cold eyes had snapped to her, as sharp as a dagger. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. He simply picked up a rusted blade from his table and tapped the edge with a long, clawed finger, letting the threat hang in the air like smoke. Sira had bolted. She knew better than to wait for him to act. The people of Thrixar didn't warn twice. Now, as she huddled behind the rocks, she forced herself to calm her breathing. She had learned to control her panic, to push the fear down deep into a place where it wouldn't consume her. She had to stay alert, always alert. Here, it wasn't just the traders she had to fear, but the creatures that prowled the wastelands, always hungry, always hunting. A sharp hiss cut through the air, sending a jolt of fear through her body. She pressed herself lower into the ground, her heart thudding in her chest as she peered over the rock. From the fog emerged a long, slithering shadow, its form barely visible in the crimson haze. It was a shadow beast, its sleek, black skin shimmering with an almost oily sheen as it moved with a predatory grace. Its eyes were hidden in the mist, but she could feel them. They were searching. Sira held her breath. Shadow beasts hunted by sensing heat, and if she stayed still, so very still, there was a chance it might pass by, thinking her just another rock in the unforgiving terrain. She had learned this trick early on, during her first days on the planet, when she had watched a traveler be torn apart by one of these creatures. The beasts moved with terrifying speed, their bodies fluid and soundless, their razor-sharp teeth capable of cutting through bone like it was nothing more than paper. The creature's long, slender neck lifted, and for a moment it seemed to taste the air. Sira's muscles screamed in agony as she forced herself to remain still, her body pressed so tightly to the ground that the jagged rocks dug into her skin. She could feel the warmth of her body radiating against the cool surface, and she knew it wouldn't take much for the beast to detect her. Seconds felt like hours as she waited, her body trembling with the strain of keeping still. The shadow beast's head swiveled, its narrow snout twitching, but then, as if deciding she wasn't worth the effort, it slithered away, disappearing back into the fog. She exhaled slowly, her body going limp with relief. Not this time, not today. But she knew it was only a matter of time before her luck ran out. Sira rose shakily to her feet, her limbs heavy with fatigue. She pulled the threadbare cloak she had scavenged tighter around her shoulders and began moving again, always careful to stay close to the rocks and shadows, avoiding the open ground where she would be more exposed. The landscape ahead was harsh and unforgiving, littered with sharp, jagged stones that jutted out of the earth like broken teeth. The ground beneath her feet was cracked and dry, the air thick with the acrid stench of sulfur and rot. As she made her way across the desolate plains, her mind drifted, as it often did, to memories of her past. Her home was so far away now, a distant star in a galaxy she would likely never see again. She had been born on a lush, green planet Aloria, a place filled with forests, rivers, and the soft glow of bioluminescent flowers that bloomed at night. It was peaceful there, or at least it had been before her stepmother had sold her to the traders. Her stepmother, with her cold, calculating eyes and cruel smile, had always viewed Sira as a burden. After her father's death, things had quickly taken a dark turn. She had been promised a life of safety, of comfort, but instead she had been bartered away like livestock. And when she had arrived on Thrixar, the traders who had purchased her soon found her to be of little value. She was too fragile, too weak for the hard labor they needed. So they had left her, abandoned her to the planet's mercy, knowing full well that Thrixar showed none. She shook the thoughts away. Dwelling on her past wouldn't help her survive. It never did. Instead, she forced herself to focus on the task at hand, finding shelter for the night. The suns were beginning to dip below the horizon, and soon the temperature would drop sharply. The nights on Thrixar were as brutal as its days, the freezing winds cutting through even the thickest clothing. And then there were the Razorbacks, nocturnal hunters with armored hides and bloodlust in their gleaming eyes. Sira had learned long ago that staying out in the open after dark was a death sentence. She pressed forward, her eyes scanning the terrain for any sign of a cave or hollow that might offer her some protection. Her limbs felt heavier with each step, the day's exhaustion threatening to pull her under. She hadn't slept in days. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. As she moved, something caught her eye. In the distance, just beyond a cluster of rocks, she saw the flicker of lights. The market, still alive with activity as traders prepared for the night. Her heart quickened, but not with hope. The market was a place of danger, where kindness was in short supply, and predators of the two-legged variety lurked in every corner. She had learned to stay away, to avoid drawing attention to herself. But her stomach growled, and the bread she had scavenged earlier had barely been enough to keep her going. She needed more, just enough to last her another day. Keeping low to the ground, she made her way toward the market, her eyes sharp and her movements cautious. The noise of the traders grew louder as she approached, gruff voices arguing over prices, the clinking of metal tools, and the low hum of alien languages she didn't understand. She stayed to the shadows, moving like a ghost between the stalls, searching for an opportunity. And then, through the chaos, she saw him. He was different from the others, a human, standing tall and rugged, with a face that looked out of place in the rough, dangerous environment. He was speaking to one of the Thrixian traders, his brow furrowed as if in deep negotiation, but it wasn't the transaction that caught her attention. It was the way he carried himself, calm, confident, yet with an air of someone who had seen too much of the universe. Sira lingered in the shadows, watching him, something stirring deep inside her. For the first time in a long time, she felt something other than fear. Could he be different? Could he be the one to help her? Her mind screamed at her to look away, to flee back into the wilderness where she at least knew the dangers, but her tired, desperate heart begged her to wait just a moment longer. And in that moment, the human's eyes met hers. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Sira felt seen. The market was a sea of chaos, filled with the sharp, metallic tang of burning fuels, the clamor of bartering voices, and the constant murmur of engines whining in the background. Traders from all over the galaxy gathered here in search of profit, pushing through the narrow, congested pathways between rows of stalls that hawked everything from alien spices to weaponry that gleamed under the market's neon lights. Above them, the oppressive crimson sky loomed like an ever-watchful eye, casting an eerie, blood-soaked hue over everything below. Amidst the cacophony, Kieran stood with his arms crossed, his face locked in the kind of expression one develops after years of being disappointed by everything the universe had to offer. He was tall for a human, his rugged form hardened by years of navigating the galaxy's most dangerous and inhospitable worlds. His skin was tanned from countless suns, and his dark hair had begun to show the first traces of gray. There was a scar running along his jawline, a faint but telling reminder of a skirmish from years past, a time when he had been more reckless, more willing to take risks for the promise of adventure. But that was a long time ago. Now Kieran was a man of pragmatism. The galaxy wasn't a place for foolish idealism or pointless dreams. It was a place to survive, to make deals, and to move on. Always moving on. He was standing at one of the market's busier stalls, his expression locked in a steely gaze as he haggled over the price of some rare mineral that he planned to sell at a significant markup on the next planet he visited. The Thrixian vendor was proving difficult, clicking his mandibles irritably as they debated the price in a language thick with guttural tones and sharp, chittering sounds. Kieran didn't particularly enjoy haggling with Thrixians. They were notoriously stubborn and seemed to derive some strange pleasure from dragging out negotiations, but the planet's unique resources were valuable. Too valuable to pass up. "I'm offering you a fair deal, more than anyone else here," Kieran said, his voice low and controlled, the product of years spent learning how to remain calm in the face of chaos. "If you keep pushing, I'll take my credits elsewhere." The vendor's dark, multifaceted eyes blinked rapidly, a sign of either irritation or amusement. Kieran couldn't tell which, nor did he particularly care. He wasn't in the mood for games. But then, something shifted in the air. It wasn't anything tangible, not the kind of thing that could be quantified by a reading or measured by a scanner. It was a subtle shift in the energy of the market, like a shadow passing over his peripheral vision. His instincts, honed by years of dealing with the unsavory elements of the galaxy, flared to life. Someone was watching him. Careful not to alert the vendor, Kieran allowed his eyes to drift casually across the market, scanning the crowds with the practiced ease of a man who had been in far too many situations that required him to be aware of his surroundings. The Thrixians, with their elongated limbs and insect-like exoskeletons, moved through the market like shadowy specters, their chittering voices blending into the hum of activity. Traders from other worlds barked over prices, while mercenaries lurked in the corners, their eyes scanning for potential contracts or trouble. And then he saw her. She was barely visible, crouched low behind a stack of crates at the edge of the market, her face hidden beneath the ragged hood of a tattered cloak. Her skin was a soft violet hue, though dirt and grime clung to her cheeks like a second layer, and her silvery eyes glimmered faintly in the low light, wide with a mix of desperation and fear. She couldn't have been more than a girl, frail, thin, and far too vulnerable to be wandering alone in a place like this. Their eyes met, and for a moment Kieran felt something stir inside him. It was a feeling he hadn't had in years, perhaps decades. Something between concern and curiosity. He had seen a lot of things in his time. He had seen worlds burn, civilizations fall, and countless lives destroyed by greed, war, and the simple cruelty of fate. But this girl, crouched in the shadows, staring at him with those wide, frightened eyes, there was something different about her. He turned his attention back to the vendor, finishing the transaction with quick efficiency. He wasn't about to be distracted by something or someone he knew nothing about. Not in this place. The vendor clicked his mandibles in a final, dissatisfied noise, and Kieran pocketed the goods, moving away from the stall without another glance. But as he turned to leave, the feeling returned, stronger this time, a sense that she needed help. And not just the kind of help that would come from a kind word or a piece of food. It was something deeper, something that felt unsettlingly familiar. He had been that vulnerable once.
Without allowing himself time to think, Kieran made his way toward the edge of the market where she was hiding, moving with practiced ease through the shifting crowd. As he neared her, she shrank back, her body tense and her eyes darting around like a cornered animal.
"Hey," Kieran said softly, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl's eyes narrowed with suspicion, her body trembling as she pressed herself closer to the crates, clearly ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. Kieran knelt down slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. "You look like you could use some help," he said, keeping his voice calm, steady. "I don't know what brought you here, but it doesn't look like you belong in this place." For a long moment, the girl said nothing. She just stared at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and something else, something deeper. Her lips parted as if she was about to speak, but no words came. Her throat worked as she swallowed, the effort clearly painful, like she hadn't spoken to anyone in days, perhaps even weeks. "I have food," Kieran said, his tone gentle, offering her an opening. "And water. You're welcome to it." Her eyes flicked toward the small pouch he carried at his side, but she remained silent, her body still tense and ready to flee at the slightest provocation. Kieran could see the war raging inside her, the instinct to trust no one, pitted against the basic need for survival. He let the silence stretch out, giving her the space to make the decision on her own terms. After what felt like an eternity, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Kieran took that as a sign to proceed, reaching into his pouch and pulling out a small packet of dried rations and a canister of water. He held them out to her, staying just far enough away that she wouldn't feel threatened. Tentatively, her thin, trembling fingers reached out from beneath the cloak, snatching the food from his hands like a frightened animal taking scraps. She withdrew quickly, retreating back into the shadow, and began tearing into the packet, her movements desperate but controlled. Kieran watched her as she ate, the corners of his mouth tightening. She was too young to have been left alone in a place like this. The rations disappeared quickly, and she moved on to the water, drinking greedily from the canister, as if she hadn't tasted liquid in days. "What's your name?" Kieran asked after a while, keeping his voice low and unthreatening. He wasn't expecting much. People like her didn't trust easily, and he didn't blame her. Not here, not after what she had clearly been through. For a moment she hesitated, her silver eyes flicking toward his face, uncertain. Then, after what seemed like a struggle, she whispered, "Sira." Kieran nodded. It was a start. "I'm Kieran." The silence stretched again, heavy with the unspoken questions that hovered between them. Kieran wanted to ask her where she had come from, how she had ended up on this hellish planet, but he knew better than to press. Trust took time. He leaned back on his heels, glancing at the market behind him, watching the other traders go about their business, oblivious to the small girl hiding in the shadows. To them, she was invisible, just another casualty in the galaxy's endless game of survival. No one cared about the lost and broken. No one except him, it seemed. "How long have you been here?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle. Sira looked down at her hands, her fingers playing nervously with the edges of the cloak. "Too long," she whispered. Kieran exhaled softly, running a hand through his hair as he processed her words. "It's not safe here," he said, glancing around again. "Not for someone like you." Sira didn't respond, but the way her eyes shifted told him she already knew that. Of course she knew. She had been surviving alone for who knew how long. "I'm leaving soon," Kieran continued, keeping his tone casual, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to offer help to a stranger. "If you want, I can take you with me, get you off this rock." Her eyes snapped up at that, wide and startled, as if she hadn't expected him to say such a thing. There was fear in her gaze, fear of hope, perhaps, of trusting someone again, of being let down. "I don't need anything from you," Kieran added, sensing her hesitation. "I'm not looking to trade favors or make deals. I just don't like seeing people left behind." Sira looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to discern whether he was lying. It was clear she had been betrayed before, probably many times, and trust didn't come easily to her. Not anymore. Maybe not ever. But there was something about Kieran, something steady and unwavering, that seemed to reach her in a way no one else had. She could feel the sincerity in his voice, the quiet resolve in his words. He wasn't like the others she had encountered, those who had used her, discarded her, left her to fend for herself in a world that had shown her nothing but cruelty. Slowly, cautiously, she nodded. "All right," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise of the market. "I'll go with you." Kieran felt a strange sense of relief wash over him, though he wasn't entirely sure why. He wasn't in the business of rescuing people. He was a trader, a man who dealt in goods and credits, not emotions or moral dilemmas. But something about this girl, about the way she had been left to rot on this forsaken planet, struck a chord deep within him, one he hadn't felt in a very long time. Without another word, he stood and offered her his hand. Sira hesitated for only a moment before reaching out, her small, trembling hand slipping into his. Together they left the market behind, stepping into the crimson haze of Thrixar's wilderness, bound for a future that neither of them could predict. But for the first time in a long time, Sira didn't feel completely alone. And for the first time in a long time, Kieran felt like he was doing something that mattered. The sun was setting over the barren landscape of Thrixar, casting long shadows across the market as Kieran and Sira walked together through the winding maze of stalls and traders. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and charred metal, and the constant hum of engines whirring in the background created a strange sense of tension. The market was preparing for the night, and Kieran knew that meant trouble. The nights on Thrixar were always dangerous. But tonight felt different. There was an unfamiliar stillness in the air, something unsettling that made Kieran's instincts prickle. He cast a glance at Sira walking silently beside him, her face hidden beneath the hood of the tattered cloak. Her movements were cautious, every step betraying her wariness of the world around her. It had been hours since she had agreed to leave with him, but the tension between them remained unspoken, thick with the weight of uncertainty. Kieran didn't blame her for the mistrust. She had every reason to doubt his intentions. But he wasn't like the others. At least he hoped she would come to see that in time. As they neared the edge of the market, the shadows deepened and Kieran's senses sharpened. He could feel something lurking just beyond the perimeter, something that set his teeth on edge. He had been on enough dangerous planets to know that when things grew too quiet, it was often because something was about to go very, very wrong. He paused, scanning the darkening horizon. The market was still bustling with activity, but there was a shift in the atmosphere, a collective sense of unease rippling through the crowd. Traders hurried to pack up their wares, casting nervous glances toward the wilderness beyond the market's borders. The distant hum of Thrixar's predators began to rise low, guttural growls that echoed through the night air like a warning. Sira tensed beside him, her hand gripping the edge of her cloak tightly as she followed his gaze. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Kieran didn't answer immediately. Instead, he tilted his head, listening carefully to the sounds around them. There was something different about the growls, something deeper, more ominous than the usual predators that roamed the night. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end. Then, in the distance, he saw it. A massive shadow, barely visible in the fading light, moving with unnatural grace through the rocky terrain. It slithered between the jagged boulders like a serpent, its body long and sinuous, its form sleek and predatory. Even from this distance, Kieran could sense its power, the way it commanded the space around it with a terrifying, silent authority. His stomach dropped. "A void beast," Kieran muttered under his breath, his hand instinctively reaching for the blaster strapped to his side. Sira's breath caught, her wide, silver eyes flicking toward him in alarm. "Void beast," she repeated, her voice tight with fear. Kieran nodded grimly, his eyes never leaving the distant creature. It's rare to see one this close to the market. They usually stay deeper in the wilderness, away from the settlements. But there it was, moving steadily toward the market, its sleek body cutting through the shadows with deadly purpose. The void beasts were legendary on Thrixar apex predators that hunted anything foolish enough to cross their path. They were nocturnal, and though they were rarely seen near the market, their presence was always a death sentence for anyone who encountered them. "They must be hungry," Kieran muttered, cursing under his breath, "or something's driven them out of their usual hunting grounds." He turned to Sira, his expression grim. "We need to get out of here. Now." But before they could move, the creature let out a bone-chilling, guttural roar that echoed through the night, sending a ripple of terror through the market. Traders froze in place, their eyes wide with panic as the sound reverberated through the air. And then, in an instant, the void beast surged forward, its massive body moving with terrifying speed toward the edge of the market. Chaos erupted. The crowd scattered in every direction, screams filling the air as people abandoned their stalls and ran for their lives. Kieran grabbed Sira's arm and pulled her with him, pushing through the panicked crowd as the void beast closed in. The ground trembled beneath their feet, the creature's powerful body slamming against the rocky terrain with each step, its jaws snapping at anything in its path. Kieran's heart pounded in his chest as they weaved through the throngs of people, searching for an escape route. His mind raced, calculating their options. There was no way they could outrun the beast, not on foot, and the market was too densely packed to find a clear path to safety. His ship was docked at the far end of the market, but reaching it would mean cutting through the very heart of the chaos. Behind them, the void beast roared again, closer this time. Kieran could hear the sickening crunch of bones and the screams of those unlucky enough to be caught in its path. "We're not going to make it," Sira gasped, her voice trembling with fear. "It's too fast." Kieran didn't respond, his jaw set in grim determination as he scanned the area around them. His mind was working in overdrive, searching for anything that could give them an advantage. The void beast was huge, too large to navigate the narrower passages between the market stalls easily. If they could find a way to outmaneuver it, they might be able to buy themselves enough time to reach the ship. "There," Kieran said, pointing toward a narrow alleyway between two rows of stalls. "We can cut through there, It won't be able to follow us. Syrah hesitated for only a moment before nodding, her face pale but resolute. Together they dashed toward the alley, ducking into the tight space, just as the void beast crashed into the market, its massive body toppling stalls and sending debris flying in all directions. The alleyway was dark and claustrophobic, the narrow walls pressing in on them as they ran. The sound of the void beast's rampage echoed behind them, the ground shaking with each of its steps. Kieran's breath came in ragged gasps as he pushed forward, his hand still gripping Syrah's arm tightly. But as they neared the end of the alley, they found their path blocked by a heavy metal gate, rusted and covered in years of grime. Kieran cursed under his breath, skidding to a halt as he reached for the lock. It was old, the kind of lock that would require either a key or brute force to break. "We're trapped," Syrah whispered, her voice laced with panic. "Not yet," Kieran muttered, pulling a small device from his belt, a portable laser cutter, something he always kept on hand for emergencies. He activated it, the thin beam of light sparking to life as he began cutting through the lock. Behind them, the void beast's roars grew louder, and Kieran could hear the screams of more victims as the creature tore through the market. Time was running out. "Hurry," Syrah urged, her eyes wide with fear as she glanced over her shoulder. "I'm working on it," Kieran growled, his hands moving with practiced precision as the laser cutter sliced through the rusted metal. Sparks flew, and the lock began to give way under the intense heat, but it wasn't fast enough. With a final, deafening roar, the void beast reached the entrance to the alleyway, its massive head snapping toward them with predatory intent. The creature's eyes glowed with an eerie, otherworldly light, and its jaws opened wide, revealing rows of jagged, razor-sharp teeth. Kieran's heart skipped a beat as he saw the beast charging toward them, its body too large to fit through the narrow passage, but still powerful enough to tear through the walls if it wanted to. "Come on," Kieran muttered under his breath, his fingers working frantically as the laser cutter made its final pass through the lock. With a sharp click, the lock snapped open, and he shoved the gate wide, grabbing Syrah and pulling her through, just as the void beast slammed into the walls behind them. The impact sent a shower of debris raining down, and Kieran shielded Syrah with his body as they stumbled into the open. The void beast let out a frustrated roar, thrashing against the walls of the alley as it tried to force its way through. For now they had bought themselves time, but Kieran knew it wouldn't last long. "We have to keep moving," Kieran said, his voice breathless but steady as he helped Syrah to her feet. "My ship isn't far." Syrah nodded, her face pale but determined. Together, they sprinted across the open ground, the faint glow of Kieran's ship visible in the distance. Behind them, the void beast continued its rampage, its massive body tearing through the market as it searched for its prey. As they neared the ship, Kieran activated his wristcom, sending the signal to unlock the cargo bay door. The ramp lowered with a low hiss, and they ran up the ramp just as the void beast rounded the corner, its glowing eyes locking onto them with deadly precision. Kieran slammed the door shut behind them, the heavy metal sealing with a satisfying click just as the creature reached the ship. The void beast roared in frustration, slamming its massive body against the ship's hull, but the reinforced plating held firm. Inside the cockpit, Kieran quickly powered up the ship's engines, his hands flying over the controls with practiced ease. The ship rumbled to life, the vibrations shaking the ground as the engines roared in defiance of the beast outside. "Strap in," Kieran said, glancing at Syrah as she took the co-pilot's seat. Her hands were trembling, her face still pale from the ordeal, but there was a look in her eyes, a look of determination that Kieran hadn't seen before. The ship's thrusters ignited, and with a powerful surge, they lifted off the ground, leaving the chaos of the market and the void beast far below. The creature let out one final, enraged roar as the ship shot into the sky, its body shrinking into a distant shadow as they broke through Threxar's crimson clouds. For a moment there was silence. Kieran leaned back in his seat, his heart still pounding in his chest as the adrenaline began to fade. He glanced at Syrah, who was staring out the viewport, her wide eyes reflecting the distant stars as they left the planet's atmosphere behind. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer now, the tension of the moment beginning to ebb. Syrah nodded slowly, though she didn't take her eyes off the stars. "I didn't think we'd make it." Kieran gave a small, wry smile. "Neither did I." They sat in silence for a while, the hum of the ship's engines the only sound as they drifted through the vast expanse of space. Kieran glanced at the navigation screen, setting a course for the nearest safe harbor, where they could regroup and plan their next move. As the stars stretched out before them, Kieran felt a strange sense of relief wash over him. It wasn't just the relief of having survived the encounter with the Void Beast. It was something about Syrah sitting beside him, alive and safe, that made him feel whole. For the first time in a long time, Kieran felt like he wasn't running anymore. And for the first time in her life, Syrah felt like she had found a place where she belonged. The starry expanse of space stretched out before them, a glittering sea of light that seemed both endless and intimate. Syrah stared out through the cockpit's viewport, her silver eyes reflecting the distant stars as they flickered against the velvet backdrop of the cosmos. The silence that enveloped them now was a stark contrast to the chaos of Thrixar. The Void Beast, the fear, the constant threat of death, it all felt like a distant nightmare, though her body still trembled with the adrenaline that coursed through her veins. Kieran sat beside her in the pilot's seat, his fingers deftly working the ship's controls as they left the hellish world far behind. His expression was calm, his focus steady as he navigated their course, but Syrah could feel the subtle shift in his presence. There was relief, yes, but there was also something deeper, a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. He had saved her, pulled her out of the abyss when no one else had cared. And though the weight of her past still clung to her like a shadow, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between them. "We're safe now," Kieran said softly, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the ship's engines. He glanced at her, his brown eyes softening for just a moment. "Thrixar's behind us." Syrah nodded, though her mind was still miles away, tangled in thoughts of what had come before and what was yet to come. She wasn't naive enough to believe that escaping Thrixar would erase the scars of her past. Her stepmother was still out there, her betrayal still fresh in Syrah's heart, and the desire for revenge burned in her chest like an ever-present flame. But for now, at least, they were free. Kieran leaned back in his seat, stretching his arms above his head before glancing at the navigation screen. "I'm setting course for Earth," he said, the words rolling off his tongue as if it were the most natural decision in the world. "It's as good a place as any to lie low for a while. You'll be safe there." "Earth," Syrah repeated, her brow furrowing in curiosity. The name was foreign to her, though she had heard whispers of it from other travelers. It was said to be a quiet world far removed from the chaos of the outer reaches, a place where people lived simple lives, free from the dangers of the galaxy's more treacherous corners. Kieran smiled, the corners of his mouth quirking up in that familiar, wry way she had come to recognize. "It's home," he said simply. "Not much to look at compared to some of the worlds out here, but it's peaceful. I think you'll like it." For a moment, Syrah allowed herself to imagine it a place where the air wasn't thick with the stench of sulfur, where the sky wasn't blood red, and where people didn't hunt one another like prey. A place where she could disappear, where no one knew her name or her past. The idea of it was almost too foreign, too impossible to believe. But Kieran believed in it, and for some reason, that made her want to believe in it too. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. She wasn't sure if he understood just how much those words meant, but she couldn't bring herself to say more. The vulnerability that came with gratitude still felt foreign to her, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a very long time. Kieran nodded in acknowledgement, but he didn't press her. Instead, he keyed in the final coordinates for their jump, and with a soft hum, the ship's hyperdrive activated, sending them hurtling through the stars. The journey to Earth was long, the days blending into one another as the vastness of space stretched out before them. But in the quiet moments between the stars, something unexpected began to grow between Kieran and Syrah, something fragile and delicate, like a flame that flickered in the dark. At first it was subtle. Kieran would sit with her in the ship's common area, sharing stories of his travels across the galaxy, the places he had seen, the people he had met. He told her of Earth, its blue oceans, its sprawling cities, and its quiet, green countrysides. And as he spoke, Syrah found herself drawn to the warmth in his voice, the way his eyes lit up when he described the world he called home. It was clear that, despite everything, Kieran still held a deep love for the planet that had shaped him. Syrah, in turn, began to open up, sharing fragments of her own story in fits and starts. She told him of her home planet, Aloria, of the vibrant forests and glowing flowers that had once brought her joy. But the story always darkened when she spoke of her stepmother, the woman who had betrayed her, sold her into slavery, and left her to rot on Thryxar. There was a bitterness in Syrah's voice whenever she spoke of her, a seething hatred that only seemed to deepen with each passing day. "She took everything from me," Syrah said one night, her voice low and hard as she stared out at the stars. "My family, my home, everything. And now she's out there, living her life as if none of it ever happened." Kieran watched her carefully, his expression thoughtful. He didn't interrupt her, didn't offer empty words of comfort or sympathy. He simply listened, and in his silence, Syrah found a strange sense of solace. He understood in a way that no one else had. "I don't know how," Syrah continued, her fists clenched tightly in her lap, "but I'm going to find her. And I'm going to make her pay." Kieran didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees as he met her gaze. "Revenge doesn't always bring the peace you think it will," he said quietly, his voice measured. "But I get it. I've been there." Syrah looked at him, surprised by the admission. She had always seen Kieran as someone who was calm, collected, a man who had everything under control, but in that moment she realized there was more to him than she had first thought. There was a darkness in him, too, a past that had shaped him in ways she hadn't fully understood. "Did it help?" she asked, her voice softer now. Kieran sighed, leaning back in his seat. "No," he admitted, "but it didn't stop me from trying." They sat in silence after that, the weight of their unspoken pasts hanging between them like a tether that bound them together. There was a shared understanding between them now, an unspoken bond forged by the pain and loss they had both endured. As the days passed, that bond grew stronger. They spent more time together, talking, laughing, and finding comfort in each other's presence. The closeness between them became a lifeline in the vast emptiness of space, something neither of them had expected, but both of them desperately needed. When they finally arrived on Earth, it was unlike anything Syrah had ever imagined. The ship descended through the planet's atmosphere, breaking through the clouds to reveal a world of breathtaking beauty. The sky was a soft, endless blue, stretching out in every direction, and beneath them, the land was a patchwork of green fields, winding rivers, and glittering cities that sparkled in the sunlight. The air was clean, crisp, and filled with the scent of life, a stark contrast to the sulphurous stench of Thryxar. Syrah pressed her face to the viewport, her eyes wide with awe as she took in the sight before her. She had seen many worlds in her time, but none of them had ever looked like this. Earth was vibrant, alive in a way that felt almost impossible to comprehend. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. Kieran smiled softly as he piloted the ship toward the landing pad. "Yeah," he agreed, "it is." They touched down on the outskirts of a quiet town, far from the bustling cities that Kieran had told her about. The landscape around them was serene rolling hills, tall trees that swayed gently in the breeze, and a peaceful lake that shimmered in the distance. It was a place untouched by the chaos of the galaxy, a sanctuary where they could finally rest. Syrah stepped off the ship, her feet sinking into the soft earth as she breathed in the cool, fresh air. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt safe. She felt free. Kieran joined her, standing beside her as they looked out at the world before them. The silence between them was comfortable now, filled with the unspoken understanding that had grown between them over the course of their journey. "I never thought I'd see anything like this," Syrah said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "After everything that happened, I didn't think I'd ever feel this way again." Kieran turned to her, his gaze steady and warm. "You deserve to feel this way," he said quietly. "You deserve peace." Syrah's heart swelled at his words, and for a moment she felt something shift inside her, something that had been building for days, maybe even weeks, without her fully realizing it. She looked at Kieran, really looked at him, and in that moment she understood. He wasn't just her protector. He wasn't just the man who had saved her. Syrah spent her days exploring the surrounding area, walking through the fields and forests, with a sense of awe she had almost forgotten she could feel. Everything seemed so peaceful, so untouched by the violence and cruelty of the galaxy beyond. The air was filled with the sound of birdsong, the rustle of leaves in the wind, and the occasional splash of water as a fish leaped from the lake. Sometimes she would sit by the edge of the water, dipping her feet into the cool surface and watching the ripples spread out in perfect, concentric circles. Kieran had taught her how to swim, a skill that had seemed so alien to her at first. But the moment she had plunged into the water, feeling it embrace her, weightless and cool, She had laughed a sound that surprised even her. It had been so long since she had felt any real joy, and the sensation of it bubbling up inside her was almost foreign. Kieran had smiled, watching her with a quiet satisfaction, as if he had always known that Earth could give her something she didn't even know she needed. But no matter how peaceful Earth seemed, there was always a part of Sira that remained restless, a part that couldn't forget the betrayal she had suffered at the hands of her stepmother. The thought of revenge was a constant undercurrent in her mind, lurking just beneath the surface of her newfound happiness. It was like a wound that had never fully healed, and even in the beauty of Earth, she couldn't escape the memories of what had been done to her. Sometimes, when Kieran wasn't around, Sira would wander the hills alone, thinking of her stepmother and the hatred that still burned inside her. The quiet anger simmered beneath the calm, peaceful exterior she had found on Earth, and no matter how much she tried to suppress it, the desire for vengeance always clawed its way back to the forefront of her mind. "I'll find her," she whispered to herself one afternoon, standing at the top of a hill that overlooked the valley below. The wind tugged at her hair, but she stood firm, her eyes narrowed with resolve. "And I'll make her pay." The nights on Earth were different too. The stars here seemed closer, more intimate, as if they had secrets to share with those who gazed up at them. The endless blackness of space felt less cold, less terrifying when viewed from the safety of this quiet, peaceful planet. But for Sira, the stars also carried memories of the countless worlds she had passed through, of the dangers she had faced, and of the life she had been forced to leave behind. One night, after a long day of exploring, Sira and Kieran sat outside their cottage, watching the stars. The fire crackled softly beside them, casting flickering shadows over the grass. The air was cool, but comfortable, and Sira found herself feeling more at ease than she had in a long time. But something else stirred in her that night, something deeper, something more vulnerable. "Kieran," she began, her voice hesitant but steady. He turned to look at her, his brown eyes warm and attentive. "I've been thinking about us, about everything that's happened." Kieran's expression softened and he leaned in slightly, his hand reaching out to gently take hers. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Sira hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to find the right words. But then, she decided that the time for hesitation had passed. She had spent too long holding back, too long hiding her feelings behind walls of fear and pain. She didn't want to be afraid anymore. "I love you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but the words were clear and true. "I don't know how or when it happened, but I love you, Kieran. You've given me something I never thought I could have again. You've shown me that there's more to life than just surviving, and I don't want to lose that." For a moment, Kieran didn't say anything. His eyes searched hers, and in the firelight, Sira could see the quiet emotion flickering there. Then, slowly, he smiled, a smile filled with warmth, with understanding. "I love you too, Sira," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of sincerity. "I didn't expect this. I didn't expect to feel this way again, but I do. You've given me something I didn't know I was missing." Sira's heart swelled at his words, and before she could say anything more, Kieran leaned in and kissed her, soft at first, gentle, but filled with the passion and emotion that had been building between them for so long. Their hands found each other, their bodies drawing closer as the intensity of the moment grew. The stars above them seemed to blur, the world around them fading away until there was nothing left but the two of them, lost in each other. They moved inside, and in the privacy of their small cottage, their love deepened into something more physical, more intimate, their bodies intertwined, the heat between them rising as they shed the layers of fear and doubt that had once kept them apart. In those moments there was no past, no future, only the present, only the pure, undeniable connection between them. Clothes were shed, and the barriers between them fell away, leaving nothing but the pure, physical expression of the love they had finally confessed. In those moments there was no fear, no pain, no thoughts of revenge or the darkness that had once consumed them. There was only them together, free and alive. In the days that followed, Sira felt a strange sense of peace, but it was tempered by the ever-present thought of revenge. No matter how much she tried to focus on the beauty of Earth, or the love she had found with Kieran, she couldn't shake the memories of what had been done to her. Her stepmother's betrayal haunted her, a ghost that refused to fade, and with each passing day, the desire to confront her only grew stronger. Sira would lie awake at night, Kieran's arm draped protectively around her, and she would stare up at the ceiling, her mind racing with thoughts of vengeance. She knew that one day she would have to leave this peaceful life behind and face the darkness of her past. She couldn't live in the shadow of her stepmother's cruelty forever. "I'll find her," Sira whispered to herself one night, her voice barely audible in the quiet room. "I'll make her pay for what she did." Kieran stirred beside her, his hand tightening slightly around her waist, as if he could sense the turmoil in her heart. She knew that he would stand by her, no matter what. He had promised her that they would face whatever came next together. But even as Sira prepared herself for the inevitable confrontation with her stepmother, she couldn't help but wonder what it would cost her. Would it take away the peace she had found here on Earth? Would it pull her away from the love she had found with Kieran? Only time would tell. For now, she would hold on to the love they had discovered in this quiet corner of the universe, even as the storm of vengeance gathered on the horizon. The sun hung low in the sky as Sira stood on the hill overlooking the quiet countryside. The landscape of Earth, with its rolling green fields and soft, golden light, had become her sanctuary in the weeks since she and Kieran had arrived. It was a peaceful place, far removed from the chaos of the galaxy. Yet, despite the calm that surrounded her, a storm still raged inside. She couldn't escape it. The desire for revenge, the need to make her stepmother pay for everything she had stolen from her, burned in her chest like an unquenchable fire. Even as she had begun to heal, finding love and safety with Kieran, the scars of her past had refused to fade. Her stepmother's betrayal had cut too deep. And now, she was ready to finish it. Kieran's footsteps crunched softly on the grass behind her as he approached, his presence grounding her in the present. She turned to face him, her eyes meeting his steady gaze. There was no need for words, he knew what she was feeling. He always did. "I'm ready," she said quietly, her voice filled with the kind of determination that left no room for doubt. Kieran nodded, his expression serious but calm. "We've prepared for this. We'll do it together." They had spent weeks planning, gathering information, and training. Kieran had taught her how to handle weapons, how to shoot, how to fight, how to defend herself in ways she had never known before. He had drawn from his years of experience as a trader and a survivor, teaching her the skills she would need to face her stepmother's forces. But it wasn't just the physical training that mattered. They had built a partnership, a bond that made them stronger together than they ever could have been apart. Sira felt that strength now, running through her like a current of energy. She wasn't the same scared, fragile girl who had been abandoned on Threxar. She had found her power, and with Kieran by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. "We leave tonight," Kieran said, his voice firm. "We'll track her down and end this." Sira nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She could already feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, her body preparing for what was to come. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment when she would finally confront her stepmother and take back what had been stolen from her. The ship hummed softly as it soared through the darkness of space, the stars stretching out in an endless expanse around them. Sira sat in the co-pilot's seat, her hands resting on the control panel as she stared out at the stars. They had left Earth behind hours ago, and now they were headed for a distant system on the edge of the galaxy, where her stepmother was rumored to be hiding. Kieran had managed to track down the information they needed through old contacts, shady dealings, and more than a few risks. He had learned that Sira's stepmother, the woman who had sold her into slavery and abandoned her on Threxar, had been hiding in a private compound on a remote planet. It was heavily guarded, fortified by mercenaries and criminal syndicates that owed her favors. But none of that mattered. Sira and Kieran had faced worse. Together they could handle whatever lay ahead. As they neared the planet, Kieran's voice broke the silence. "We're almost there. You ready?" Sira took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I've been ready for a long time." Kieran gave her a reassuring nod before activating the ship's stealth systems, which would allow them to approach the planet undetected. They couldn't afford to be spotted. If her stepmother's forces knew they were coming, they would be walking into a trap. But Sira wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Kieran brought the ship down just outside the perimeter of the compound, landing in a small clearing hidden by the surrounding trees. The night was dark, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and vegetation. As they stepped off the ship, the sound of wildlife echoed through the forest, a stark contrast to the stillness that hung over the compound in the distance. Sira tightened her grip on the blaster strapped to her side, her heart racing as they made their way toward the compound's entrance. Kieran moved beside her, his movements silent and precise, his blaster ready in his hand. They had gone over the plan 100 times, where the guards would be posted, how they would bypass the security systems, and how they would confront her stepmother once inside. They reached the outer wall without incident, crouching low behind a cluster of rocks as Kieran worked to disable the security grid. Sira kept watch, her eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Her pulse quickened with each passing second, the anticipation building inside her like a coiled spring. After what felt like an eternity, Kieran gave her a quick nod. "We're in." They moved quickly, slipping through the gate and into the compound's courtyard. The area was eerily quiet, the only sound the soft rustle of the wind through the trees. The guards were stationed near the main building, but Kieran had hacked into the security systems to create a diversion, drawing them away from the entrance. They moved swiftly through the compound, staying low and out of sight. The tension between them was palpable, but Sira felt no fear, only resolve. When they reached the main building, Sira's stepmother's private quarters were just ahead. They approached the door cautiously, Kieran scanning it for any additional security measures. It was locked, but nothing Kieran couldn't handle. Within moments, he had the door open, and they slipped inside. The room was dimly lit, the walls lined with expensive tapestries and artwork from various worlds. It was a stark contrast to the cold, desolate compound outside, a room of luxury and wealth, a reminder of the life Sira's stepmother had built for herself on the backs of others. And there, standing in the center of the room, was the woman who had betrayed her. Her stepmother. The woman's face was older now, but still sharp and regal, her eyes cold and calculating as they fixed on Sira. She wore a long, flowing robe of deep red, and her posture was stiff with the kind of arrogance that came from years of power and control. "Sira," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I must admit I didn't expect you to survive, but I suppose I underestimated you." Sira's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped forward, her hand tightening around the blaster at her side. "You didn't underestimate me. You abandoned me. You sold me like I was nothing." Her stepmother's lips curled into a cruel smile. "You were nothing. A burden, an obstacle. I did what was necessary." Rage surged through Sira, her vision narrowing as the memories of her past flooded back, being torn from her home, sold into slavery, left to die on a hostile planet. But she didn't let the anger consume her. She had come too far for that. "You took everything from me," Sira said, her voice low but steady, "but not anymore." Her stepmother's smile faltered as Kieran stepped forward, his blaster raised. The air in the room crackled with tension, the unspoken threat hanging between them. "I'll make you pay for what you did," Sira continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You'll never hurt anyone again." Her stepmother's eyes flicked toward Kieran, then back to Sira. For the first time, there was a flicker of uncertainty in her gaze. "You can't kill me," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "You're not a killer." Sira met her gaze, her expression hardening. "No, but I'm not the helpless girl you left behind either." And with that, Sira fired. The blaster shot hit her stepmother in the shoulder, sending her crashing to the floor with a scream of pain. Kieran moved quickly, disarming her and securing her hands behind her back. It was over in a matter of seconds. Sira stood over her, her heart racing as she looked down at the woman who had once held so much power over her life. Her stepmother lay on the floor, writhing in pain, her arrogance shattered. For so long, Sira had imagined this moment, had fantasized about the revenge she would take. But now, standing here, she realized something. Her stepmother had no power over her anymore. The fear, the anger, it was gone. She had won. Kieran glanced at her, his eyes filled with understanding. He knew what this moment meant. He stepped back, allowing Sira the space to decide what would come next. But Sira didn't need to think about it. "Take her," Sira said, her voice steady and calm. "Turn her over to the authorities. She'll answer for what she's done." Kieran nodded, moving to call in the local enforcers who would take her stepmother into custody. Sira watched in silence as her stepmother was dragged away, her screams of protest echoing through the compound. The woman who had once controlled her life was nothing more than a defeated criminal now. It was done. As the sun rose over the horizon, casting a soft, golden light over the compound, Sira and Kieran stood side by side, watching the dawn break. The weight of her past had finally lifted, leaving behind a sense of peace she had never thought possible. "It's over," Kieran said quietly, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. Syrah nodded, her heart filled with a quiet sense of triumph. "It's over." She turned to look at Kieran, a smile spreading across her face. They had done it together, and now they could finally look forward to a future free from the shadows of her past. As they walked back to the ship, hand in hand, Syrah felt a sense of hope she had never known before. She had found love, she had found strength, and she had reclaimed her life. The journey had been long, painful, and filled with darkness, but it had led her here, to this moment. And for the first time in a very long time, Syrah knew that everything was going to be all right. The galaxy was wide and filled with possibilities, and whatever came next, she and Kieran would face it together. This was their new beginning,